our agenda today. We're going to take 5-10 minutes to get through some welcome and introductions. And then I'll pass things off to my special guest, who will be talking about the Design Justice Network, design justice principles, and the history of both. Around 7:30, we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes to do an activity. And this activity is going to center around the things that we talk about in the first part of our talk. Around 7:50, moving close to 8, we'll have a chance to kind of report back what we've learned or discussed in our activity. And at 8 o'clock, we'll be wrapping things up with some next steps. I'm also planning on leaving our webinar open for another 15-20 minutes until about 8:30 to answer any questions or even open up the chat so that you all might even be able to interact with one another a little bit, depending on how the discussion goes. So welcome. We're encouraging you to make use of the question and answer, the Q&A chat features in Zoom. So if you have not been a part of a webinar in this Zoom platform, please look at that little Q&A button down along the bottom part of your screen. And like I mentioned, when the time is right, we will also encourage you to interact using our public Miro board. And your contributions on Miro will be visible to anyone with the link. So just know that it will be available to anyone. So now's a good time as I move into introductions for myself and our special guest. For you, if you would like to introduce yourself via our chat. And if you're comfortable with that, in the chat box, share your name, your pronouns, where you're joining us from, and maybe a bit about what interests you about this session. So I will move into introductions for us. So my name is William Nickley. I go by he and him pronouns, and I am a Design Justice Network member in the digital node. I am also an assistant professor in the Department of Design at The Ohio State University, and a co-founding board member of a small nonprofit here in town called Local Tech Heroes. And I'm very happy to introduce our special guest for tonight, Victoria Barnett. And I'll let you go ahead and say the rest of this.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria. I'm based in Toronto, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of many different nations, but the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat peoples, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. So there are many traditional territories where I live. I am a freelance graphic designer and web designer. And I have been part of the Design Justice Network since it was called the Design Justice Network and before it became that. So I've been doing design justice and graphic design work for very, very many years. And you can see my website there if you want to see more about me. But I'd say look at designjustice.org instead of my website. And for me, part of design justice is that we try to always acknowledge the land and the territories from which we're coming. And that can definitely be more than the traditional territories that you're on, because there are people who've been displaced from all over the world in various continents. So it's kind of keeping in mind all of those elements. And I introduced myself and acknowledged the land that I'm on. And so we try to encourage people to think about that process or that thoughtfully when they are doing the work that they're doing and the locations that they're in and the traditional territories that they're on. Will might have had something more to say. I think I took over there.
You're fine. I was on mute. We're still ironing out the kinks here, but I think you covered it about the native land acknowledgement. And as for those of us who are calling from Columbus, because there are quite a few, I would encourage you to as a starting point, check out this website, native-land.ca, and maybe do a little bit of investigation yourself about our very space here in Columbus. So yes, actually, I am going to turn the reins over to our special guest now for the first part of our presentation. So Victoria, please take us away.
Now I was muted. Um, so, so again, I think like Will said at the beginning, we've both never done this in webinar format. I'm very used to being able to see everybody and participate with you all at the same time. So this is a new kind of a platform. So I'll just say again, like super happy that you're all here and wishing that I could see you, but I'm really glad that we can see the chat. So what I will say is, you know, what is design justice? I'm sure many of you have heard of it or heard that term or have maybe come across the network. Some of you folks might be really, really new. But the Design Justice Network, it's an international community of people who, or people and organizations who've been committed to rethinking the design processes that they're involved in or that are systematic design processes to center the people who are often marginalized by that particular design. And the network works according to 10 design justice principles, which are on the website, and we'll look at them in a minute. So what is design justice? I know we have more slides. Okay, there, that's perfect. So as you can see and read, design justice is a framework for analysis on how design, and design can be anything from graphic design, which is what I specialize in, to the design of systems and frameworks. It can be folks who are doing engineering and all the tools and systems that they have access to, or it could be coding and algorithms. But design in and of itself, everybody is able to do and everybody actually does. They might just not realize it. So it's the analysis of how design distributes benefits and burdens between various groups of people. And what design justice focuses on is the ways that design itself reproduces or challenges the matrix of domination, which being white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, settler colonialism, and other forms of structural inequality. And this is a quote coming from the Design Justice book, which is by Sasha Kasandzachuk, which totally, if you haven't seen or heard of it before, I totally encourage you to either buy the book or you can access it online for free. All the chapters are open source, so you can read them online and find what is most interesting, or maybe you'll want to read the whole book.
And as a quick reminder, and sorry to interrupt, Victoria,
it's okay.
The slides, like we mentioned, are going to be available afterwards. So all of these links where the URL is actually obscured because we're in a webinar, you'll be able to go back and click on these things. So thanks.
Yeah. And if someone asks us a question, we can share those links too directly. But yeah, so the book, as you saw, is a really good resource on various backgrounds and histories of things. But to talk about design justice, I think kind of the easiest way to think about it, or if it's new to you, one way to think about design justice is to think about what design injustice is, what the opposite of what just justice is trying to do is, and a lot of times it's good to use examples. I'm a very much kind of an example, hands-on type of learner. So the way that I can explain it quite well to people is by using a practical example. The chart that you see in front of you is very basic and very simple, and we'll be looking at it a little bit later in the Miro boards. But you see 3 questions: who was involved in the process, who was harmed, and who benefited. And so in any sort of design process, whether that be a graphic design process, whether that be the design of, you know, government structures, the way that a road exists, and whether or not it has the ability for everybody to be able to walk or peruse over the road, it's all designed in some way, shape, or form. And so these 3 questions here, when thinking about design justice, are asking who is exactly involved in the process of making or creating that thing that people are using, and who gets harmed and who benefits from that process. And so the example that I'll use is something that probably everybody here has heard about. Just, Apple as a company, not Apple as a piece of fruit, but Apple as a company, for example. They create a lot of different things, and there are many people involved in those various processes, but there are also many people who use the products that might not be involved in the process, or who make or are involved in making of those products but can't actually access the products themselves, like an iPad or an iPhone or something like that. And when thinking about design justice or design injustice, when we're looking at a chart like this, we're thinking about where are the benefits going to people, who's actually involved in that process. And most often you would think that there are people up at the top, CEOs and big executives, who are making a lot of decisions and hold the most power. And the people who are less so involved, which could be you and I as people who may be using iPhones. It could be the people who are working in the mining factories to produce the batteries that go into the iPhones. It's not to say that everybody cannot benefit from that process, but it is to say that the people most involved in the process are often the ones who benefit the most. And the people who are less involved in that process tend to benefit less, and will often be harmed. I think you can go to the next slide, Will. I think that one. Yes, I've kind of gone ahead with process, but what you see here now is like what a typical design process would look like, a typical kind of corporate or process of design, which would be like, you see the pink the pink dots in the center, and those are the people who are involved in that design process. And then the green dots, or the CN dots on the outside, are the people who are not involved in that process. And so when we're talking about design justice, for example, this is not the process that we would be using. This is what a typical kind of design process is, and so this would be the design injustice process. And when we look at this process now here, the design process is that circle that you see, and the people who are normally the most marginalized and left out of that process are actually at the center. That's why the CN green dots are in the center and the pink dots are on the outside. The pink dots being the people who would normally benefit the most. So what design justice calls and asks of people is to bring in the people who are most affected or most generally marginalized by that process into that process, and be focused on the center of that process. And when I'm talking about Apple, I'm talking about, I forgot about my example. When I'm talking about Apple as a company, those pink dots, I'm sure you could think of a bunch of examples of who those pink dots would be, but the CEOs and the big executives at the top, the people who are app developers and people who are making lots of money from the different apps and computers that are being produced and made. Whereas the CN dots are the people who are working in those mining locations, who are probably getting really sick from working in mining, maybe dying because of farming for battery products, for the other products that are involved in just making a project. So what we're talking about within design justice is putting those folks at the center of that process and having an involvement in whether or not their choices in that process, for example. Okay, you can go to the next one now. Yes, and I've kind of said this already, but that design justice is also a community of practice. So when talking about the international network, what we're talking about is ensuring that equitable distribution of the benefits and the burdens. And I think we slid over those slides, but the benefits and the burdens are within that 3-circle chart that we looked at the beginning. There. So So normally what you would see is the benefits of a design process more so going to the people with more power, and less benefits going to those with who are less powerful, and more harms going to those who are less powerful, whereas less harms going to those who are more powerful. So less harms are going to that CEO and more harms are going to the people, even though they may benefit from the process because maybe they get an iPhone at the end of it. They're still not very powerful in that situation. So we're talking about that, and we're also talking about an entire design process, the decisions, participation within it, and also keeping in mind as we did the land acknowledgements and tried to think critically about that, that the recognition of community-based Indigenous diasporic design traditions, knowledge, and practice. So the Design Justice Network, how did it all start and where did it come from? So Design Justice, as you can see, 2016, the photo that you can see here is a session that took place at the Allied Media Conference. It is a conference that happens every year, and actually now it's biannually in Detroit at Wayne State University. This year it took place online, of course, because everything these days is online. But it's a really great conference for media makers, technologists, artists, designers, community organizers that come together. And there was a group of many, many people from different design backgrounds that came together and were thinking about how do we think beyond design and justice, the examples I was just giving. How do we think beyond design and justice? How do we bring justice into design and also create principles upon which we can work and strive to encourage others to work towards? And so this first session that happened at the Allied Media Conference, there was about 30 or so people that joined, and the session was called Generating Shared Principles for Design Justice. And what we did was we used that, the 3-circle chart. I totally cannot think of the name of those kind of circle charts. Do they have a name, Will? I feel like I know they have a name.
Are you thinking like a Venn diagram?
A Venn diagram, exactly, yes. So that Venn diagram that we looked at. What we did in that session was use that Venn diagram and took real world examples of design projects that were happening in Detroit. And as I mentioned, the Allied Media Conference is based in Detroit. So we took 3 real world examples, and I'm gonna give you one of those examples, which was something called the Empower Coat, which was a winter coat that could also turn into a sleeping bag for this city's houseless population. And so what we did was we looked at different projects, that being a good example to share with you today. And what we did was we used that Venn diagram to talk about who was benefiting, who was being harmed, and who was actually participating in the process of designing that coat. And we asked specific questions. So we asked, design justice is, and we do this by, and then we used that diagram to talk about them. And we talked about those benefits and the process of who was involved. And that example with the Empower Coat, what we talked about or what we learned, especially from local Detroiters, was just that there are people who are creating this coat that have a whole lot of power and who are involved in this process. And the people who this coat is designed for, that it is supposed to help, which is the houseless population, that they are having absolutely no say in whether or not this is the thing that they actually need. So what Design Justice does is tries to bring in those folks into the process of doing it. And the image you can see on the screen now is just some of those brainstorms from the various tables that happened in that room. And you can see people suggested things that we would design with instead of designing for, that the designer is not the expert, that the community members and the people in this project are experts and that we need to work together. You can go to the next one. Okay, and so I should conclude that part. So after that session, that first session happened, there was a very rough iteration of the design justice principles as you see on our website. And then the image that you're seeing now is the following year at the Allied Media Conference, where another 30 or so people came together, and what they did was pull apart all of the various drafted design justice principles, edited them, retweaked them, changed the language. And then some of the people that you see in this photo also helped to kind of put them together, finalize them in the form that you see now on the Design Justice website. And the idea behind having these principles, and this photo that you can see here is just that exact editing process. So you can see dismantle is underlined, you can see there's different crossouts of words. So people were really just thinking through what are these words that we need to use, or what are these principles that we'd like to use to make our work design justice. And so it's like so many people from all over the place that participated in this. And then as you can see, after in I think 2018 is when we published the 10 principles as you see them now. And these are some of the zines that have been produced over the years, kind of talking about the process of how those were made and created. The one on your right, I think you should see it on your right, it's the blue and red one, is the 3rd edition, which has the principles actually printed inside of it. And you can get, you can see and access these zines for free on the Design Justice website. Many amazing people put them together. We can go to the next slide. The current structure. In terms of the network, it has really evolved over those years, and a lot of that has to do with participation from folks here in this room, from people who have become part of this network, and who have had an interest in design justice. So what you see now is the current rough structure of how this network works. There is the steering committee, and they make the kind of high level decisions about how to work with the principal, how to set up and structure the network, and a lot of that kind of boring administrative things that I don't think it's boring because I've been doing it for a long time, but the less potentially glamorous parts of the work, but they help make the decisions to support the local nodes, the working groups, members, and signatories who are all part of this network. I think I updated on the website that there is over 1,100 people who've signed on to the principles now. There are about 300 or so members, and by members, that means that people who have either volunteered their time for a particular working group or node or a particular activity, or they've paid a membership fee which supports the rest of the network, whether it be with the zines, whether it be with the keeping the website afloat, sometimes contract work. So those are the people involved. And working groups and local nodes are different ways to volunteer your time. And local nodes are groups that, sorry, Will, that are based locally in a location, but they could also be digital, because there's a digital node for folks that don't have a particular location, or as many people maybe in their location that they've found yet. But they work together on sort of local or issues that are within the community with that aim of using the principles in that work that they're doing. Okay, sorry, yeah. And so in terms of the network, and I know we're almost at time, right? So just tell me when we need to stop. So in terms of the network itself, there has been many different activities, design education. So like a workshop like what we're doing right now, talking about the work of the network and the work of the many amazing people within this network, and the many volunteers. Projects such as putting some of those zines together, or hosting various webinars and educational types of events, and lots of workshops and kind of online engagement with people, especially right now during the global situation that we're in. So there's lots of things that this network has been doing and will continue to do. And myself, I've just become a staff for 4 months of contract, and my role is to try to support all of those processes, because this network has really grown really fast. And these are some of the challenges of that, because it has been volunteer run. People are distributed all over the world. So in terms of those local nodes, we have folks in San Francisco, which I think is the furthest east. And then we have some folks in Singapore, which might be the furthest west. Hopefully I'm saying the right directions. Another part of that has been that we haven't had a formal structure. And the only reason we never had a formal structure is because of the organic process of this network coming together. So right now, that's what the steering committee is working on, is creating a formal structure that makes sense, that supports all of the amazing people as part of this network. And the idea of aligning around design justice, which you can read the principles and really love them and want to engage with them, but then the question is how do I start in that process? And that is often a question that I answer, and it is very much specific to the person or location where you are and the types of resources or the types of people that you have, but it's possible to use them across the board. Yeah. And I think now I'm introducing the principles, or
well, yeah, and I'm realizing now the flaw in our plan was you can't see what the next slide is, right? So
it's
yes,
okay.
We have a few slides where we can kind of go through the Design Justice Network principles before we get to our activity. This is kind of the last section in the slideshow, so please continue.
So oftentimes when we have sessions like this, we'd get just different volunteer folks from the audience to be able to kind of read them out, and we've had them sung out before sometimes for fun, and I know that can be kind of funny and like a chant, but sometimes it's been fun. But these are the 10 principles, and they exist on designjustice.org. If you have never seen them and this is your first time seeing them, hopefully this is great and something you'll really identify with. And if you do, you can sign on to them through the website. I think there's a slide about that later. But we can, I guess maybe Will and I can take turns reading them.
Sure, that sounds great. Take it away.
Okay, so the first one is, we use design to sustain, heal, and empower our communities, as well as to seek liberation from exploitative and oppressive systems.
Principle number 2, we center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the design process.
Number 3 is, we prioritize design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer.
Number 4 is, we view change as emergent from an accountable, accessible, and collaborative process, rather than as a point at the end of a process.
Number 5 is, we see the role of the designer as a facilitator rather than an expert.
Number 6, we believe that everyone is an expert based on their own lived experience, and that we all have a unique and brilliant contributions to bring to the design process.
Number 7 is, we share design knowledge and tools with our communities.
Number 8, we work towards sustainable, community-led, and controlled outcomes.
Number 9 is, we work towards non-exploitative solutions that reconnect us to the earth and to each other.
And last but not least, number 10, before seeking new design solutions, we look for what is already working at the community level. We honor and uplift traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge and practices.
And then the last slide is just reminding you, like, if you haven't seen these before and you really kind of identified with them as you heard them or as you've seen them, that you can become a signatory. And that means that you read them and that you are excited by them and want to use them in your work, whatever your work may be, whether it's making breakfast every morning or it is your professional graphic design role. It could be that you're working in the library, or it could be that you work in the grocery store, or an important, a very important service job, but that you would really identify with them and want to sign on and put your name to it. There's nothing that's going to hold you to it. And it is very, as I mentioned, in terms of challenges, it's difficult. There are 10 principles and it's difficult to pull them all in, but the idea being that you're trying to use them as a guideline for the work and the processes that you're going to be involved in. And the other thing I will mention quickly is that on the website as well, we have them translated into 6 different languages now. So there's French, Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, Czech, and English, of course, but I feel like there's one more, I'm forgetting it. But they're translated, and if that's a thing that you're super interested in, that can totally be a volunteer role. We'd love to have them in as many languages as we can to be able to support people to learn about them. So yeah. And become a member is just, sorry, I realized I forgot, is just another step that you can take. Like if you'd love to be involved more within the network, you can join as a member. I think the fee is like, you could use 50 cents up to, you know, $500 or $600, and you can choose how much you'd like to use that for. So becoming a member gives you access to our Slack channel, which is one of the main benefits right now, and some of the member-led or member-run workshops and seminars that happen, mostly promoted through that Slack channel. And it allows you to connect with people from all over the world that are part of the network. I believe I saw somebody ask the question if there's one, maybe a node in Australia. And I feel like I've seen some inquiries into that recently. So I would say if folks are interested or wanting to figure out whether they can connect with people in different parts of the world and whether anyone's around and doing that, that the best way is to just contact us, and we'll see what we can do to connect you to people.
And on that point, Victoria, we will at the end of this slide show and also at the end of our webinar go over the contact information, the right places to look for information around that. And I guess another thing that we can answer really briefly before we get to interaction time, my favorite time, is there was a question that came up again, if where will people be able to find the link to this recorded session? And the answer, without giving you the actual link, is the same place that you registered for this webinar. It will be published on that on the Urban Art Space website, also linked here in my background image. And that link is also in the presentation. So when I remember it again later, I'll put it in the chat as well if that's useful. So interaction time, this is when I like to stand up, move around. I've been like in front of this computer screen too much, you know, like stretch out, limber up, interaction time. Hooray. So now is the time to get out your computer. If you are able to join us on Miro, that is great. I'm going to type the link that you can see on the screen right now in the chat as well. Or if you cannot, or if you'd rather not do one more thing interacting on your screen and you'd rather just watch, that's fine. Victoria and I are actually going to do this activity live as well. So once we get people started and kind of encourage them to maybe mute our presentation so they can focus, you can stay tuned with us and we'll kind of go through our activity and you can even participate with us through the chat. So the link for those of you who would like to participate, it's go.osu.edu/ all of that gobbledygook, DJN Miro Columbus 9/30/2020. And let's just see if I also put an https:// on here. No, not quite. Okay, you're gonna have to paste that into your browser. But that's where you can get to the Miro board. Miro will ask you, you do not need an account. If you have an account, that's fine. Miro will ask you for a password. The password to get into the board is Design Justice, all lowercase, no spaces, Design Justice. And that's what we're going to do live as well. Thank you for typing it into the chat, whoever did that.
I did, but I'm sorry, my spelling is very terrible. I always mix up letters, so.
Okay, so bear with me for 1 second as I bring up the Miro board and then go back to sharing my screen. And in this part of the presentation, I'm going to ask you live, Victoria, if you wouldn't mind watching the Q&A as questions come in, I will try to address them. Oh man, okay, I'm going to share the screen again. And I see that several of you are buzzing around the Miro board already, which is great. That makes me feel good that there are guests. That's funny, it gives you names as well. Guest designer, guest thinker, guest sculptor, guest researcher. Maybe you even put those in. Okay, so this is our Miro board. There are 3 activities that we will spend the next 15 minutes roughly working on together. And then you're welcome to continue working on these into the wee hours if you so choose. We're gonna go over them really briefly before I turn all of you anxious Miro people loose, and then we'll kind of go back through as the group who remains with us to go through the activity together. The first activity is going to ask you to use the Venn diagram we talked about earlier to dissect a project. So you're going to think of a design effort you currently or were formerly involved with, or a well-known project that you can think of. Maybe it's an initiative or a project that you've seen in your town. Maybe it's one that you know from history. We want you to think of a project that could be considered a design effort, and then use the framework to reflect on it critically. And there are a couple steps. You're going to want to add a project title. So you can actually double click on these add project title things and add your title. Make it something really short and descriptive, probably like iPhone, or our example is going to be what, the Keystone XL pipeline, I think. And then again, just really briefly, things you can do in Miro. We've posted a few post-it notes that you can double click and then add text to. The text should auto adjust its size. You can write a novel if you like. You don't need to. And you can also use copy and paste controls to add. You can also delete post-its from your framework. So that's kind of the main project that we'll be working on as a group here. And I see that some of you are already claiming spots, so that's great. There's one spot down here that we will be using for our in-webinar example. So please don't take that one. Or if you do, we'll find another one, that's fine. There are 2 additional activities that are a little bit more about gauging interest. And although we're not tracking who you are in Miro, there's no way for you to tell us, your information aside from like writing it out. In activity 2, we're asking you to drag and drop stars next to some of the activities that you might be interested in participating in, organizing, or facilitating in a design justice node near you in the near or distant future. We have a couple listed here, and I wanted to add one of the projects. Man, you said a project, Victoria, during our chat, and now it's totally escaping me. But as there are other interesting projects that maybe you have worked on in the past that relate to design justice or conversations, I encourage you to add notes so that other people can kind of express their interest. The color of the stars does not matter. And then finally, the third activity down here would be to drag a star to the local node that you either are already a part of, or maybe a local node that is nearest you. And you'll notice here that Columbus, Ohio doesn't have a node. And my slightly secret mission tonight is to hopefully expose a bunch of wonderful people in Columbus who already do great design work and often have ambitions and projects and things that overlap with the design justice principles, into seeing if there's interest in starting and supporting a node here in Columbus. I think the nearest one would be Detroit, and then maybe Chicago and Philadelphia if my geography brain is working well. So that's the activity for tonight. For those of you who are already active in Miro, feel free to mute us so that you can put your thinking cap on. And what we'll do is get back together in about 10 minutes, let's say about 10 minutes. So at 7:55, you can unmute and we'll come back together and then we can have a moment to kind of share if we so choose. Okay, so.
I was also going to share about the number 3 where it says
Ooh,
local
sure.
nodes. So that, because I remember I saw someone ask about Australia, but I think another, like if you're here from a place that is not already listed there, another potential activity is just to draw a new circle and put the location where you are. What I'm going to do right now is also drop in a link about like steps on how to start a local node.
There is a link in here as well, Victoria.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
You can, the link to the designjustice.org website area where it's about starting or joining a node is in here in Miro. So feel free to click that now or after our session is over if you want more information. Yes, thanks for reminding me though. That's a really important one. There's actually a whole zine that is specifically about joining and starting nodes. I think that's the most recent one that was just let out.
Yeah. And someone else is asking if we can talk a little bit more about the who is harmed. I would say in terms of who is harmed in a process would be the people with the least amount of power. The people who are benefiting not like either not at all or very, very little in any process. So if I go back to that example that I used around Apple and maybe the development of a new iPhone, for example, probably the people who are most harmed are probably people who, well, one, can't actually access any of the tools and resources that are being created by Apple. So like can't afford to buy an iPhone or the applications. People who are also harmed would be the people who are, mining, who are probably being paid pennies, whereas the CEO and the high up executives are benefiting a lot from them being the ones working in those mines. And then also people who are harmed are like people who can't actually, they're not having their voice heard within, what do I need in terms of an iPhone? Like what would be tangible for me to have an iPhone or produce it? And those people are being harmed because their voices are not being included in part of that process, and yet they are still someone who may be a client or someone as part of that process. I hope that helps a little bit for the person who asked the question. It's totally dependent on the situation that you might be working on, but it's thinking about who is either not benefiting or who is not involved at all in the process that either has some effect of whatever it is that's being developed or created.
Great, and as you were speaking, Victoria, I added a couple of those examples to a project called New iPhone in our board. So if anyone would like to continue filling out this existing project, you're welcome to do that as well. And you'll notice in these, well, you know what, we're also going to go through an example here based on the Keystone XL pipeline. So we're going to kind of walk through each one of these areas and try to find at least one person or one type of person that would fit in each of these areas. So maybe like a 2-second introduction to the Keystone XL pipeline. For those who don't know, weren't aware, it wasn't something that you saw, but in the last couple of years, there have been, well, actually for many years, there have been projects that have infringed upon the natural land rights of indigenous people in the United States. And often those are perpetrated by large natural resource or mining companies, oil companies and things. One that was in the news quite a bit was the Keystone XL pipeline, which runs through the West, the Midwest, and who was the company who was? Do you remember, Victoria?
Oh, I am so sorry. I was including the links, but I think
Enbridge.
someone just wrote Enbridge. Yeah.
Enbridge, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. Enbridge was the company who was trying to build a pipeline going through some native land or nearby native land. And of course, with pipelines, there is always a risk of leak. And I'm grossly oversimplifying a lot of the background here, but I think for the purposes of our activity, we can start to fill out and reflect on this type of project, this massive design project, and reflect on it. So I guess if you want to start, Victoria, I can start writing some of the things.
So in terms of who's involved, well, definitely Enbridge.
Okay.
Enbridge, the company, oil and gas companies, government agencies, or I don't know if agencies is the right word, but the government who's making the decisions. There would be environmental. Am I going too fast for you?
No, you're fine. And,
Okay.
and I'm trying to kind of place them where they might be in here as well. Like Enbridge, the oil company, is probably someone who was involved in the process and also probably benefited from the process as well.
Oh, I totally forgot to say in terms of why it's a Venn diagram, because part of that process is that you could be involved and be benefiting. You could also be involved and be harmed. You could also be harmed and benefiting and be involved in it all together. And then there's also
Absolutely.
people who are outside, they're not involved
Not involved. Exactly.
in it at all, which is why it is a Venn diagram. I totally forgot to mention this.
It's fine. I have a feeling. I have a feeling a lot. There are a few people who picked up on that too. But I'm glad we're doing the example, because now we get to find some examples, some of the post-its that would go in each of those areas.
I'm also reading and seeing so many cool different projects that folks have put in here, like motorcycle company, decriminalization, U.S. election ballots, GP East Charette, new hotel in Manhattan, greening Broadway. Like, these are awesome. And another thing I'd say just about this activity, for folks that are interested in starting a node or interested in starting a conversation around design justice, this is a really good activity that you can do with people to talk about it, to talk about the benefits, the harms, and help kind of bring people into thinking about these types of things as a design process, and that decisions are being made. Okay, Will, where am I supposed to do now? More just information on Keystone.
We're looking at Keystone stuff. So, well, we thought of at least one person who might have been involved. Government US, Enbridge involved, also probably benefited. Someone who was harmed and probably not involved, and kind of the reason for all of the news would be like the indigenous people who were a part, who stood out on the highway and tried to protest this thing.
Exactly, like the folks whose land is being taken over and or taken over. And also, like, even thinking about climate justice activists and what folks are doing all over the world, people who are harmed by that are, the next and future generations, the environment. There are so many people who are left out of a process that are harmed as part of it. The people who also probably benefit in terms of that process but might not be involved are, those other kind of higher up, financially sound types of folks that, like, they might not be involved in Enbridge, they might not be involved in the government, but they're probably making money. People who own a gas station, or people who have super expensive fancy cars that run on oil and gas. There's some benefit to those there's some benefit that these folks get that, but they are not involved in a process of any of this.
Interesting. And
Yeah,
you know what?
investors is a really good one. Yeah.
Another thing it makes me think of, Victoria, is like some of these consumers who maybe they're using the material that's coming through the pipeline to power their cars. Some of those people probably are also harmed because of some of the bigger environmental impacts of you know, a carbon-based system.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
totally. They use the thing, but they don't realize that the effect that it has both on them and the rest of the world. So that's a really good one. Yeah.
what can you think of someone? I was interested in this note that would be outside. So who is someone who's not involved, not harmed, not benefited, just totally
Hmm.
outside the system?
Of course, I say it and then I can't think of who that person might be. Because probably potentially there's going to be a harm or a benefit in either way. Um, but you know, like I could think of the next generation of kids. Like they
Oh,
you know, like 2, 3, up to 5 years old. They don't yet, like, they're learning, they're growing immensely, but they have no idea of what might be going on in the world, um, which technically means they are being harmed, but they're almost unknowingly, like they don't understand that process. Yeah, totally. I see someone wrote kids still would be harmed. Yeah, they're totally still going to be harmed, but they're kind of, it's like they're outside of it and they might not understand that process.
that's
But
interesting. It's like future harm. It's not
yeah.
harmed in the moment, it's harmed potentially in the future, and also maybe benefit potentially in the future too.
Hmm.
So I can almost see like a whole time dimension. We can make this Venn diagram a 3D thing, and we can think about past, present, and future as well. Um,
Yeah, like, and also depends who that kid might be. Like, if it's the kid of one of these investors or the Enbridge CEO, like they're definitely benefiting very much from that. The kids from the indigenous folks' land will definitely not be involved. So maybe there isn't anyone outside of it. Maybe I was thinking too much.
or if we like think of it as a
Yeah.
snapshot of the present moment or something.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, seven generations. Someone's saying in
Yeah.
the chat
Someone
too.
saying, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. I know we're already through our quick 10 minutes here, and I want to
Oh,
for
right.
those who are not actively participating in Miro and kind of following along, I want to make sure we have a chance to let people kind of share out and talk about the experience before we kind of break for the official session, and we can kind of leave things open a little longer if people would like to stay. I think one thing that's really important, and you already more than alluded to this in your slides, Victoria, is that this very simple Venn diagram is just a starting point. It's a good place to start thinking about how a design effort impacts more than just those who were planned to benefit from the design. And so often in my own experience and as an industrial designer, and even in the ways sometimes we teach industrial design, we're so focused on the benefit of a design effort that it's important to use something to start the conversation about who else might be involved and who else might be harmed. Okay, so for those who are still buzzing around the Miro board, that is totally fine. I think we're gonna take a moment here, and I'm gonna switch back over to my slides really quickly. And yes, so officially it is Shareback time. So what I would like to do is in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, hear back from maybe 2 or 3 people. And I guess because this is webinar form, we're going to sort of go look at the chat for this. But if you're someone who would like to share your example in Miro, maybe just chime in on the chat and say, hey, it's this project, and I'll do my best to kind of zoom in, and we can kind of talk through what we see together. And of course, we're looking at this really fun to watch bird's eye view at the moment, as we still see a guest Mironeer and a guest developer, a guest painter kind of hovering around. And
I love some of these examples. I already read a bunch of them, but I've seen some new ones. Like diverse campus recruiting, feedback sessions, identity, multimedia quilt,
Well, maybe we can
30
just,
media telescope.
I
Yeah,
see.
we
So
could read out a couple of them.
Robin is happy to talk about theirs.
Okay.
Even if it's not complete, maybe Robin, you can help point us to what the name of the project is. The
Identity.
identity multimedia quilt. Linked. Ooh, bonus
Oh,
points for making a link. I'd imagine that's actually taking us to a project. So feel free, Robin, to maybe write a thought that you would like us to take away from your map as maybe Victoria and I kind of read through some of your post-its. It looks like right smack in the middle of the who was involved, who benefited, and who was harmed Venn diagram is the storytellers outed through their participation. That's kind of interesting. I guess maybe we need to know a little bit more about the process, but my guess is maybe that some storytellers that were involved in the project and maybe thought they might benefit had something revealed that they weren't intending to reveal. Maybe that's something.
I'm just reading on the link that Robin shared.
Okay.
It says, the identity media quilt is an interactive tapestry woven together by one theme. Raise awareness of the spectrum of nuanced identities and stories of LGBTQIA+ people as told through multimedia patches.
I see.
And yeah, Robin just wrote, patches tell their story about their queer identity.
So that makes sense. And it looks like
Mhm.
people who benefited from being involved in the process or were involved and also benefited included the designer, Robin, and the queer storytellers. And there were also some people who weren't involved who may have benefited, including closeted queers thinking about coming out and queers with unusual experiences. And then it looks like Robin has also identified that there were a few people who were harmed, people who can't access the internet. So yeah, absolutely, accessibility to a tool is a big part of it. Non-English speakers. So I guess maybe the assumption, just like this talk today, this is entirely in English, and so we're excluding people who can't speak that. And then there were a few people involved in the process who may not have been harmed or benefited, such as the thesis advisors, Robin's parents, the College of New Jersey. So thank you for sharing, Robin. And Robin also writes, oh, okay, harmed by exclusion was who was harmed. Okay, it makes me interested to click that link and learn a little bit more. Why don't we take a look at one more example here while we're all together, and then we'll kind of wrap things up for the webinar for those who have been on Zoom too long.
I actually saw one that, I don't know if this person wants to share, but Zoom sessions for older adults.
Oh, okay. Thank you, by the way, Robin, for sharing.
Yes, thanks, Robin. It's kind of upper and to the right.
I think I'm on Zoom sessions for older adults. Why don't you walk us through it?
If anyone, whoever created this one, wants to type something in the chat, feel free. What I'm seeing here is that the people who are involved are the family members, coworkers, and friends of the learners, also the trainers, and the curriculum designers, so the people who are creating, I guess, the training or the sessions. People who are benefiting are the online businesses, such as Zoom. I'm sure Zoom's stocks have gone through the roof during COVID.
Right.
Park said it's there. This is there. So hopefully I'm reading it out correctly, Park, but feel free to add some more. Benefits are also communities and organizations of older, or organizations that the older adults are part of, and religious organizations. People who are harmed are non-English speakers, probably presuming that everything is taught and done using English language. People who don't have access to computers. So similar to, I think what Robin's thing was, that you know, if you don't have a computer, you can't participate in this thing. People who do not have a house, presuming that they wouldn't have access to either reliable internet or access to a computer to join a meeting or a session. And current team programs. Now that one looks like it might be bridged in between, like they participate and they also are harmed, but I don't know what it may be. I guess potentially that, no, I'm not going to guess because I don't know what
Yeah.
it might mean. Um, but the people who are involved and also harmed and also benefited are the older adult learners, and I assume because there are benefits to them being involved, there are benefits to them potentially learning, but then there are also probably harms because it's not an easy thing, and without access to those various things would be difficult. People who are being harmed but also benefiting are older adults who have limited access, so probably limited access, whether it be to a computer or a device that they can use, access to the internet, access to like the knowledge of learning about these sessions that might be happening. And then there's also who's benefiting in part of the process. That would be the family members, friends, and coworkers probably. And yeah, Park is saying it's hard to figure out who should be in the very, very center. Ideally, no one is harmed and helped. Yeah, but you make a really good point that there is, like, there are going to be people who are in many spectrums of that, and each person involved may benefit and may be harmed. So that's a really good point to bring up, Park. That is like, just because you benefit the most doesn't mean that there isn't also a potential harm on you. So in that Apple example that I used at the beginning, and the production of an iPhone, for example, like that CEO might be benefiting financially and in many other ways, but the harm that is caused by the climate crisis and mining will still affect them in some way, shape, or form, even if they have access to more resources to be able to deal with it. And we probably care less about the harm that it might happen to them, but in the overall idea of climate crisis being something that affects everybody, they would still be harmed. So that's a really good point, that you could be in all of the buckets, especially based on who you are.
Well, I'm really happy that you shared Park, and I'm really happy that so many people were able to participate in this Miro activity. And I think one takeaway I have in the moment right now is that yeah, these are definitely conversation starters, and it's making me again kind of lament the webinar format, but all the more reason to try and set up another event where we can use this as a jumping off point for projects. So